In today's video, I'm going to tell you about one of the most intense operations I've ever been part of. A routine transport mission that turned into 18 hours of pure hell in the mountains of Afghanistan. A mission where a Black Hawk that should have fallen simply refused to give up, just like the soldiers inside it. Don't leave this video because I'm going to tell you every single detail of Operation Thunder Eagle, and trust me, you won't believe how this one ended. My name is Steve Harris, former Sergeant Major with 25 years of service in the United States Army. Every day on this channel, I bring you real stories from military operations I lived through during my quarter-century of service. Stories of courage, strategy, brotherhood, and the kind of moments that define what it really means to serve your country. But before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. It helps more people find these real military stories. Subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new operation story. And definitely leave me a comment telling me what you think about today's mission. Also, don't forget to check out all the gear and products I use and recommend. You'll find everything in the description or pinned in the first comment. Now let me take you back to October 2009, somewhere in the rugged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. I was a sergeant major then, assigned to a forward operating base that was basically a speck of American soil, surrounded by some of the most hostile terrain God ever created. We're talking about mountains that scraped the belly of heaven, valleys so deep you couldn't see the bottom, and weather that changed from blazing heat to bone-chilling cold in the span of an hour. The mission briefing that morning seemed straightforward enough, and that should have been our first red flag. In my experience, the missions that sound easy on paper are the ones that'll test every ounce of training you've ever received. We had a resupply run to make to Outpost Bravo, a remote position about 40 clicks northeast of our main base. These guys had been isolated for 3 weeks due to weather conditions that kept the roads impassable and made helicopter operations nearly impossible. Outpost Bravo housed about 30 soldiers, and they were running critically low on everything: ammunition, medical supplies, food, and most importantly, morale. These weren't rear echelon troops we're talking about. These were frontline infantry who'd been taking sporadic fire from insurgent positions in the surrounding ridgelines for weeks. They needed supplies, and they needed to see some friendly faces to remind them they weren't forgotten out there. The aircraft assigned to our mission was a UH-60 Black Hawk, tail number 9126374. And I remember that number because that bird and I were about to go through hell together. She was a good machine, well maintained by our crew chief, Sergeant Rodriguez, a kid from Texas who treated that helicopter like it was his firstborn child. Rodriguez had been turning wrenches on Blackhawks for 6 years, and there wasn't a bolt, wire, or rivet on that aircraft he didn't know personally. Our pilot was Chief Warrant Officer Michael Tank Thompson, a steady-handed aviator from Ohio with over 2,000 flight hours in combat zones. Tank got his nickname not because he was big, though at 6'3" and built like a linebacker he certainly was, but because of his reputation for being virtually indestructible in the air. The man had been shot at more times than I could count and had never once wavered at the controls. Co-pilot was Warrant Officer Jennifer Phoenix Martinez, and if you're wondering about that call sign, it's because she'd already walked away from one helicopter crash earlier in her deployment. Phoenix was smaller in stature, but had nerves of steel and reflexes that would make a cat jealous. She was also one of the best tactical aviators I'd ever flown with, capable of threading a Black Hawk through terrain that would make most pilots break out in cold sweats. My team for this mission consisted of 8 soldiers, each hand-picked for their specific skills and experience. There was Staff Sergeant Mike Doc Williams, our medic, a former paramedic from Chicago who'd saved more lives than he could count. Doc was the kind of guy who'd run into enemy fire to reach a wounded soldier without thinking twice about his own safety. Sergeant First Class Tony Bulldog Parker was our communications specialist, a career soldier from Georgia who could make a radio work in conditions that would fry civilian electronics. Bulldog had been in country for 8 months and knew the communication protocols, frequencies and call signs for every unit in our area of operations. Then we had Sergeant Lisa Viper Johnson, one of the finest snipers I'd ever had the privilege to serve with. Viper was from Montana, grew up hunting in terrain not too different from where we were operating. She could put a bullet exactly where she wanted it from, distances that defied belief. Specialist Craig Boots Mitchell was our engineer, a young soldier from Pennsylvania who seemed to have been born with a wrench in his hand. If something was broken, Boots could fix it. If something needed to be blown up, Boots knew exactly how much C4 to use and where to place it. Corporal James Ghost Anderson was our reconnaissance specialist, so quiet in movement that he'd earned his nickname by literally appearing and disappearing without anyone noticing. Ghost was invaluable for gathering intelligence and providing early warning of enemy positions. Sergeant Amanda Hawk Davis was our machine gunner, carrying an M240B that she wielded with deadly accuracy. Hawk was from Texas, tough as leather and twice as reliable. When things got hot, you wanted Hawk and her 240 laying down suppressive fire. Private First Class Carlos Rookie Santos was our newest team member, on his first deployment but eager to prove himself. Despite his inexperience, Rookie had scored expert on every weapon system during training and showed the kind of tactical awareness that usually took years to develop. Finally, there was Specialist Derek Compass Lee, our navigation expert and backup radio operator. Compass could read terrain like most people read newspapers, and his ability to call in accurate artillery and air support had saved our bacon more times than I could count. The weather that morning was what we called marginal, which in military terms means conditions that are technically flyable but make everyone nervous. The ceiling was hanging at about 800 feet, with scattered clouds that looked like they were playing hide-and-seek with the mountain peaks. Visibility was decent, maybe 4 to 5 miles, but the wind was gusting up to 25 knots from the northwest, which would make the approach to Outpost Bravo interesting, to say the least. We loaded the Black Hawk with about 3,000 pounds of supplies, cases of MREs, ammunition for various weapon systems, medical supplies, batteries for their communication equipment, and even a few bags of mail that had been backed up due to the weather. There's something about getting mail in a combat zone that's hard to explain to civilians. Those letters from home aren't just paper and ink, they're lifelines to everything you're fighting to protect. Rodriguez completed his pre-flight inspection with his usual thoroughness, checking every external component, fluid level, and mechanical system. Tank and Phoenix went through their cockpit checks, testing flight controls, instruments, communication systems, and emergency procedures. In a combat zone, your pre-flight inspection isn't just routine maintenance. It's the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic. The intelligence briefing indicated light enemy activity in our area of operations, which should have been another red flag. In my experience, when intelligence says light enemy activity, it usually means the bad guys are planning something and being unusually quiet about it. The route to Outpost Bravo would take us through a valley system that had seen sporadic insurgent activity over the past month, but nothing that couldn't be handled with proper tactics and awareness. Our call sign for this mission was Thunder Eagle 7, and we were scheduled to depart at 0800 hours local time. The plan was straightforward: fly direct to Outpost Bravo, deliver the supplies, spend about 30 minutes on the ground to allow the troops there to load any personnel who needed medical attention or were rotating back to the main base, then return via the same route. Flight time to the outpost was estimated at 35 minutes each way, which would put us back at base by 1,000 hours if everything went according to plan. But as every combat veteran will tell you, No plan survives contact with the enemy, and sometimes the enemy isn't who you expect it to be. As we lifted off that morning, the Black Hawk rising smoothly into the crisp mountain air, none of us had any idea that we were about to face one of the most challenging 18 hours of our military careers. The mountains of Afghanistan were about to test everything we'd learned about warfare, survival, leadership, and the unbreakable bonds between soldiers who refused to leave anyone behind. The flight started normally enough. Tank held the aircraft steady as we climbed to our cruising altitude of about 1,200 feet above ground level, high enough to avoid most small arms fire, but low enough to maintain good visibility of the terrain below. Phoenix monitored our navigation systems and maintained communication with our base, providing regular position reports as we followed the planned route through the valley system. I was positioned near the crew door, studying the terrain below through my field glasses, looking for any signs of unusual activity. The mountains in this part of Afghanistan are simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Ancient peaks that have witnessed countless wars, carved by millennia of wind and weather into formations that provide perfect concealment for anyone wanting to remain unseen. About 20 minutes into the flight, Ghost, who was also watching the terrain below, tapped me on the shoulder and pointed toward a ridgeline to our north. Through his binoculars, he'd spotted what appeared to be several figures moving along a goat path that paralleled our flight route. Could have been local nationals, could have been insurgents. In that part of Afghanistan, the distinction wasn't always clear, and assuming the best could get you killed. I passed the information to Tank, who adjusted our course slightly to increase our distance from the ridgeline while maintaining our overall heading toward Outpost Bravo. It was a small tactical adjustment, the kind of decision that experienced crews make automatically, but it probably saved our lives during the initial moments of what was about to unfold. Phoenix reported our position to base as we approached the final valley before Outpost Bravo, and that's when Bulldog, monitoring enemy communication frequencies, picked up increased radio chatter in Pashto. He couldn't translate everything, but the tone and frequency of the communications suggested coordinated movement of multiple groups. The hair on the back of my neck started to stand up. In 25 years of military service, you develop an instinct for when things are about to go sideways. Outpost Bravo came into view right on schedule, a small collection of reinforced positions carved into a mountainside clearing that looked barely large enough to land a helicopter. The outpost was surrounded by HESCO barriers and concertina wire, with guard towers positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. It wasn't much to look at, but it represented American presence in a region where showing weakness could be fatal. Tank began his approach, bringing the Black Hawk down in a controlled descent toward the small landing zone adjacent to the outpost. The soldiers below had already cleared the area and were standing by to unload our supplies. Everything appeared routine, professional, exactly the way a resupply operation should look. But that's when the mountains around us erupted in gunfire, and our routine mission transformed into a fight for survival that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage we possessed. The war in Afghanistan was about to teach us that sometimes the most dangerous missions are the ones that start out looking easy. The first RPG streaked past our nose like a fiery comet, close enough that I could feel the heat wash through the cabin. Tank immediately pulled power and began evasive maneuvers, but in the confined space of the valley, there wasn't much room to maneuver. That's when the second RPG found its mark, slamming into our tail section with an explosion that shook the entire aircraft and changed everything. The explosion from that RPG hit felt like getting punched by a giant's fist. The entire aircraft shuddered. Alarms started screaming in the cockpit, and I could smell the acrid smoke of burning metal and hydraulic fluid. Tank fought the controls as the Black Hawk began to yaw violently to the right, the damaged tail rotor struggling to maintain directional control. "We're hit! We're hit!" Phoenix called over the intercom, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us. Tail rotor damage, losing hydraulic pressure in the aft system. Through the crew door, I could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions along the ridgelines surrounding the valley. This wasn't random insurgent activity. This was a coordinated ambush, and we'd flown right into the kill zone. The enemy had been waiting, watching our patterns, studying our routes, and they'd picked this moment to spring their trap. Tank was fighting the aircraft with everything he had, using every technique in the pilot's handbook to maintain control of a machine that wanted to spin like a top and fall like a rock. The collective was heavy in his grip, requiring constant pressure to keep us airborne, and I could see the strain in his shoulders as he wrestled with controls that were no longer responding the way they should. "Thunder Eagle 7, this is Bravo Base," came the urgent call over our radio. "We're taking effective fire from multiple positions. Recommend you abort the landing and egress immediately." But Tank was already ahead of them, pulling power and attempting to climb out of the valley. The problem was, a Black Hawk with tail rotor damage doesn't climb like a healthy aircraft. We were gaining altitude, but slowly, painfully, and all the while, enemy fire was converging on our position from what seemed like every rock and crevice in the surrounding mountains. Doc Williams was already moving through the cabin, checking each team member for injuries from the initial blast. The RPG had detonated against our tail boom, sending shrapnel through the aft section of the aircraft, but miraculously, none of it had penetrated into the passenger compartment. Rodriguez, our crew chief, was already on the intercom with Tank and Phoenix, providing damage assessment from his position near the crew door. "Tail rotor's still turning, but it's not biting the air like it should," Rodriguez reported, his Texas drawl somehow reassuring even in the middle of a crisis. "We've got structural damage to the tail boom, hydraulic leaks, and what looks like control linkage problems." The enemy fire was intensifying by the second. I could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s, the deeper bark of PKM machine guns, and the occasional boom of RPGs being launched from concealed positions. Tracer rounds were streaking past our windows like deadly fireworks, and I knew that sooner or later, our luck was going to run out. "Sergeant Major," Tank called back to me, his voice tight with concentration. "I can keep this bird in the air for now, but we need to find a place to put her down. The hydraulics are failing, and I'm losing authority on the tail rotor. We're not making it back to base." I keyed my radio and contacted our forward operating base. "Base, this is Thunder Eagle 7. We are combat ineffective and require immediate assistance. Aircraft is damaged, and we need an emergency landing zone. Over." The response came back immediately. "Thunder Eagle 7, base copies. Be advised, we have multiple aircraft en route to your position. Estimated time of arrival 20 minutes. Can you maintain flight for 20 minutes? I looked at Tank, who was now using both feet on the anti-torque pedals to maintain directional control. Sweat was pouring down his face despite the cool mountain air, and every muscle in his body was straining against controls that were becoming less responsive by the minute. "Negative, base," I replied. "We need to find a landing zone now. Aircraft is not going to stay in the air for 20 minutes." Phoenix was already scanning the terrain below, looking for any piece of ground flat enough and large enough to accommodate a Black Hawk. In that part of Afghanistan, such places were rare. The mountains were steep, rocky, and covered with terrain that would challenge even a healthy helicopter, let alone one that was barely maintaining controlled flight. "There!" Phoenix called out, pointing to a small plateau about 2 clicks to our northwest. "It's not perfect, but it's the best option we've got." I could see the area she was indicating, a relatively flat section of mountainside that looked like it might be just large enough for our aircraft. It wasn't ideal. The approach would be difficult, and the plateau was surrounded by higher ground that would give enemy forces excellent observation and fields of fire. But in our current situation, ideal wasn't an option. Tank began a careful turn toward the plateau, each movement of the controls requiring maximum concentration and skill. The Black Hawk was responding sluggishly, and I could see that maintaining any kind of precise control was becoming increasingly difficult. Every few seconds, the aircraft would yaw suddenly to the right as the damaged tail rotor lost effectiveness, and Tank would have to compensate with collective and cyclic inputs that were becoming less and less effective. "Listen up," I called to my team over the intercom. "We're going down, but we're going down fighting. As soon as we touch the ground, I want a 360 security perimeter established immediately. Doc, be ready to assess any injuries from the landing. Bulldog, get on the radio and give base our exact coordinates. Viper, I need you to identify enemy positions and start putting accurate fire on them. Everyone else, prepare for a defensive action." The enemy had followed our movement and was repositioning to engage us at our landing site. I could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions, and it was clear that whoever was coordinating this ambush had communications and discipline. This wasn't a random group of insurgents. This was a well-planned operation designed to bring down American aircraft and kill American soldiers. Ghost was at the opposite crew door, his M4 carbine ready, scanning the approach route for immediate threats. "Sergeant Major," he called. I counted at least 6 distinct firing positions, range between 400 and 800 meters. They're using the terrain for concealment and trying to set up interlocking fields of fire. As we approached the plateau, Tank had to make a decision that would have challenged even the most experienced pilot under perfect conditions. The approach angle was steep, the winds were gusting unpredictably through the mountain passes, and the aircraft was responding to controls like a wounded animal. But Tank Thompson hadn't earned his reputation by backing down from difficult situations. "Coming in hot," Tank announced. "Everyone hold on and be ready to move fast once we're on the ground." The final approach felt like it took forever and happened in an instant simultaneously. Tank brought the Black Hawk down with a combination of skill, determination, and probably a fair amount of divine intervention. The landing was hard, harder than any of us would have preferred, but we were down and alive. And in our current situation, that counted as a victory. The skids hit the rocky ground with a jarring impact that rattled every rivet in the aircraft. The damaged tail rotor made one final groaning rotation before seizing completely, and Tank immediately pulled the power levers to flight idle and began shutting down the engines. We were on the ground, but we were far from safe. "Move! Move! Move!" I shouted as the engines wound down. "Establish perimeter now!" My team responded with the precision that comes from months of training and combat experience. Within 30 seconds of touchdown, we had a defensive perimeter established around the aircraft, with each soldier positioned to cover a specific sector of fire. Doc Williams quickly assessed everyone for injuries, a few bumps and bruises from the hard landing, but nothing serious. We'd been lucky. Rodriguez immediately began a damage assessment of the aircraft while Bulldog worked to establish communication with our base. The radio equipment had survived the RPG hit and the rough landing, which meant we could call for help, assuming help could reach us in time. "Base, this is Thunder Eagle 7, Bulldog transmitted. "We are down at grid coordinates." He read off our precise location from his GPS device. "Aircraft is severely damaged and non-flyable. We have 8 personnel on the ground, no serious injuries at this time. We are taking effective fire from multiple enemy positions and are in immediate need of assistance." The response from base was immediate and reassuring. "Thunder Eagle 7, base copies your transmission. We have multiple aircraft en route to your position, including Apache gunships and a recovery team. Estimated time of arrival is now 15 minutes. Hold your position and maintain radio contact." 15 minutes. In a firefight, 15 minutes can feel like 15 hours. But we'd been in tough spots before, and we had good defensive positions, adequate ammunition, and most importantly, we had each other. No one was going to be left behind on that mountain. Viper had already identified several enemy positions and was engaging targets with her M24 sniper rifle. Each shot was carefully aimed, precisely delivered, and devastatingly effective. "Target down," she reported after her third shot. "Enemy machine gun position at bearing 270 degrees, approximately 600 meters. The enemy fire was accurate and persistent, but they were dealing with professional soldiers who'd been trained for exactly this type of situation. Hawk had her M240B machine gun positioned behind a natural rock formation, providing suppressive fire that kept enemy forces from advancing closer to our position. Ghost was moving between positions, gathering intelligence on enemy locations and numbers. "Sergeant Major," he reported, "I count at least 12 enemy fighters, possibly more. They're well equipped and coordinated. This wasn't a chance encounter. They were waiting for us." That confirmed what I'd already suspected. This ambush had been planned, which meant someone had been watching our operations, studying our patterns, and feeding information to insurgent forces. It was a sobering reminder that in Afghanistan, the enemy was always watching, always learning, always adapting. But before we continue this story, I'm going to recommend a product that I've been using, and it's making a total difference in my life. You know, as you get older, you start noticing things. A little more fatigue, less energy, and let's be honest, things just don't work the way they used to, especially when it comes to intimate moments with your partner. I wasn't getting those firm, lasting erections I used to have, and it was affecting my confidence. Then I started using a product that completely changed my life and my relationship. I'll leave the link in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment. Now it's time to continue our story. The first enemy assault came about 5 minutes after we'd established our perimeter. They tried to rush our position from 2 directions simultaneously, probably hoping to overwhelm us before we could organize an effective defense. They had underestimated the training and experience of American soldiers. Compass, from his position on the eastern side of our perimeter, spotted the movement first. "Contact east," he called out. "Multiple enemy personnel advancing on our position. Range 300 meters and closing." Hawk immediately shifted her machine gun to engage the eastern threat, her M240B chattering in controlled bursts that sent 7.62-meter rounds downrange with devastating accuracy. The distinctive sound of her weapon echoed off the surrounding mountains, and I could see enemy fighters diving for cover as her fire found its mark. Simultaneously, Boots spotted the second assault element approaching from the south. "Contact south!" he shouted, opening fire with his M4 carbine. "At least 6 fighters, moving through the rocks." This was exactly the kind of coordinated assault that could overwhelm a small unit if they weren't prepared for it. But we were prepared. Every member of my team knew their job, knew their sector of responsibility, and knew that the soldier next to them was counting on them to do that job with precision and courage. I moved between positions, coordinating our defense and ensuring that we maintained effective fire on all enemy assault elements. The key to surviving this type of attack was to break up the enemy assault before they could get close enough to use grenades or to assault our position directly. "Viper," I called to our sniper, "I need you to identify and eliminate any enemy leaders you can spot." Johnson was already scanning through her scope, looking for targets of opportunity. "I see a guy with a radio about 400 meters to the northeast," she reported. "He's directing the assault." "Take him," I ordered. The crack of Viper's rifle was followed immediately by the satisfying report. "Target down. Their communications are disrupted." And the loss of their leader and communications coordinator threw the enemy assault into confusion. Without effective command and control, their coordinated attack began to fall apart. Individual fighters continued to engage us, but the organized, simultaneous assault had been broken. Doc Williams, despite being our medic, was also an experienced infantryman, and his M4 was adding to the volume of fire that we were putting downrange. "Enemy personnel withdrawing to the north," he reported. "Looks like they're regrouping for another attempt." Rodriguez, our crew chief, had completed his damage assessment of the aircraft, and the news wasn't good. "Sergeant Major," he reported, "the bird's not going anywhere. Tail rotors completely destroyed, hydraulic systems are shot, and we've got structural damage to the tail boom. Even if we had a maintenance facility right here, this aircraft would need weeks of work before it could fly again. That meant our extraction would have to come from another aircraft, and until help arrived, we were on our own on that mountain plateau. The enemy knew we were stranded, and they would keep trying to overrun our position until either they succeeded or help arrived. Bulldog was maintaining constant communication with our base, providing updates on our situation and receiving information about the inbound rescue mission. "Sergeant Major," he reported, "Base says the Apache gunships are 10 minutes out, and the recovery team is right behind them. We just need to hold this position for 10 more minutes." 10 minutes. We could do 10 minutes. We'd already proven we could handle whatever the enemy wanted to throw at us, and with Apache gunships en route, the tactical situation was about to shift dramatically in our favor. But the enemy wasn't finished with us yet. They'd tasted blood when they brought down our aircraft, and they wanted to finish what they'd started. The next assault was going to be their best effort, and we needed to be ready for it. That's when we heard the sound that every ground soldier in Afghanistan had learned to respect and fear: the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. The whistle of incoming mortar rounds is a sound that gets burned into your memory the first time you hear it. It starts as a distant whine, barely audible over the noise of gunfire, then builds to a shriek that tells you death is falling from the sky, and you have maybe 3 seconds to find cover or make peace with your maker. "Incoming!" I shouted, and 8 highly trained soldiers hit the dirt simultaneously, each one finding whatever cover was available on that rocky plateau. The first mortar round impacted about 50 meters to our west, sending up a geyser of rock, dirt, and shrapnel that peppered our position like deadly hail. The second round was closer, maybe 30 meters to our north, and the third one, damn near, took my head off, exploding just 20 meters from our defensive perimeter. The concussion from that blast felt like getting hit by a truck, and for a moment, my ears were ringing so loud I couldn't hear anything else. "Sound off!" I called out as soon as my hearing started to return. One by one, each member of my team reported in, shaken up, covered in dust and debris, but alive and still capable of fighting. That's the thing about professional soldiers. It takes more than a few mortar rounds to keep them down. Bulldog was already adjusting our radio frequency to call in a counter-battery fire mission. In military terms, that means when someone's shooting mortars at you, you find their position and you shoot bigger mortars back at them. "Base, this is Thunder Eagle 7, he transmitted urgently. "We are taking effective indirect fire from enemy mortars. Need immediate counter-battery fire, over." The response from base was immediate. "Thunder Eagle 7, we copy indirect fire. Counter-battery mission is being processed. Apache gunships are now 8 minutes from your position. Can you mark enemy mortar positions with smoke or laser designation?" Ghost was already on it, using his laser rangefinder to identify the likely position of the enemy mortar team. "I've got a probable mortar position at bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 1,200 meters, he reported. "There's a small saddle between 2 peaks where they could set up and have good observation on our position." That made tactical sense. Mortar teams need 3 things to be effective: a position that allows them to fire at their target, good observation to adjust their fire, and concealment to avoid counter-battery fire. The saddle Ghost had identified provided all 3. Viper was scanning that area through her sniper scope, looking for any sign of enemy personnel. "I can see movement in that direction," she confirmed. "Looks like at least 3 individuals, and there's definitely equipment that could be mortar tubes." Another salvo of mortar rounds came whistling in, this time a full 4-round pattern that bracketed our position. The enemy was adjusting their fire, walking their rounds closer to our defensive perimeter. One round landed so close to Boots's position that it buried him in dirt and debris, but he came up spitting dust and immediately returned to his fighting position. "They're getting our range," Doc Williams observed, which was stating the obvious but needed to be said. "The next salvo is probably going to be right on top of us. I made a tactical decision that went against every instinct I had, but sometimes in combat you have to take calculated risks. We're displacing the perimeter," I announced. 50 meters to the east, where those large rocks will give us better overhead cover. Move in teams. Ghost and Rookie first, then Viper and Compass, then Doc and Boots, then Hawk and Bulldog. Rodriguez stays with the aircraft. Displacing under fire is one of the most dangerous maneuvers a small unit can execute. It requires perfect timing, precise execution, and a lot of trust in the soldiers around you. But staying in our current position meant sitting still while enemy mortars adjusted fire onto our heads, and that was a guaranteed way to take casualties. Ghost and Rookie moved first, covering the 50 meters between our current position and the new defensive line in a series of short rushes, while the rest of us provided covering fire. The enemy's small arms fire intensified as they spotted our movement, but both soldiers made it to the new position without being hit. Viper and Compass went next, and that's when I realized just how professional the enemy force was that we were dealing with. As soon as they saw our people moving, they shifted their own positions to maintain effective fire on both our old and new defensive positions. These weren't untrained insurgents. These were experienced fighters who understood small unit tactics. "They're moving too," Ghost reported from his new position. "I count at least 4 enemy personnel repositioning to maintain fields of fire on our new location." Doc and Boots made their move, and Boots almost didn't make it. Halfway to the new position, he stumbled on the rocky ground and went down hard. For a moment, he was completely exposed to enemy fire, and I could see muzzle flashes converging on his position. But Doc Williams lived up to his reputation, laying down accurate suppressive fire with his M4 while Boots scrambled to his feet and completed the movement. Hawk and Bulldog moved last, with Hawk carrying her heavy M240B machine gun and ammunition. That weapon system weighs more than 25 pounds, but Hawk moved with it like it was a carbine, keeping low and fast while Bulldog covered her movement with his own rifle. As soon as everyone was in the new position, I grabbed Rodriguez and we made our own sprint from the aircraft to the new defensive perimeter. Rodriguez was reluctant to leave his damaged Black Hawk, but I convinced him that a dead crew chief couldn't fix helicopters. The new position was definitely better. The large rocks provided excellent protection from both direct fire and indirect fire, and we had good fields of fire in all directions. But the enemy wasn't giving us time to get comfortable. Another mortar salvo came in, this time targeted at our old position, which confirmed that displacing had been the right decision. "Thunder Eagle 7, this is Falcon 1-1, came a new voice over our radio. "We are 2 Apache gunships, 5 minutes from your position. Can you mark enemy positions for engagement?" I felt a surge of relief hearing that transmission. Apache gunships carry enough firepower to level a small city, and their crews are some of the best trained combat aviators in the world. The cavalry was almost here. Bulldog immediately responded, "Falcon 1-1, Thunder Eagle 7. We have enemy mortar positions at bearing 045 degrees from our location, range 1,200 meters. Also, multiple small arms positions throughout the surrounding ridgelines. We are marking our position with infrared strobe." Compass activated our infrared strobe light, which would be invisible to the naked eye, but would show up clearly on the Apache's thermal imaging systems. In the modern battlefield, proper identification of friendly forces is crucial to avoid friendly fire incidents. "Thunder Eagle 7, Falcon 1-1, has your strobe in sight," the Apache pilot confirmed. "We're beginning our attack run on the mortar positions now. Keep your heads down." What happened next was like watching the hand of God reach down and smite our enemies. The Apache gunships came screaming over the ridgeline, their 30mm chain guns chattering like chainsaws as they engaged the enemy mortar position. Each round from those guns is the size of a beer bottle and explodes on impact, and when you're firing them at a rate of 600 rounds per minute, the effect is devastating. The enemy mortar fire stopped immediately and permanently. Through my binoculars, I could see secondary explosions from the mortar position as ammunition cooked off in the fires started by the Apache's guns. Whatever mortars the enemy had been using were now scrap metal scattered across the mountainside. But the Apaches weren't finished. They began systematically engaging every enemy position that had been identified, using their thermal imaging systems to locate insurgent fighters who thought they were safely concealed. The distinctive sound of Hellfire missiles being launched echoed through the valley, followed by explosions that shook the ground beneath our feet. "Falcon 1-1, this is Thunder Eagle 7, I transmitted. "Outstanding work on those mortar positions. Be advised, we still have small arms fire coming from multiple locations, and we believe there are additional enemy personnel in the area." "Copy that, Thunder Eagle 7, the Apache pilot responded. "We're going to make another pass and clean up any remaining threats. Recovery birds are inbound to your location. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes. We'd been on that mountain for almost an hour, and help was finally arriving. But I knew from experience that the most dangerous moments in any rescue operation are often the final minutes, when everyone starts thinking they're safe and lets their guard down. "Stay alert," I called to my team. "This isn't over until we're back at base." As if to prove my point, enemy small arms fire erupted from a position that hadn't been engaged by the Apaches, somewhere to our south where the terrain provided excellent concealment. Green tracer rounds streaked past our position, and I could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing close overhead. Viper immediately shifted her position to engage the new threat. "I see muzzle flashes, bearing 180 degrees, range approximately 400 meters, she reported. "Looks like at least 2 enemy personnel with automatic weapons." Before she could engage, Hawk had already shifted her M240B to cover that sector. The heavy machine gun roared to life, sending streams of 7.62mm rounds toward the enemy position. The rate of fire from that weapon is devastating, 750 rounds per minute of precisely aimed destruction. The enemy return fire slackened immediately, but it didn't stop completely. These fighters were determined, disciplined, and willing to die to achieve their objective. They'd probably been told that bringing down an American helicopter and killing American soldiers would be a great victory for their cause. What they hadn't counted on was the level of training, experience, and sheer determination of the soldiers they were fighting. Every member of my team was a professional warrior who'd been forged in the crucible of combat operations. We'd trained for situations exactly like this, and we weren't about to let some mountain insurgents get the better of us. The sound of rotor blades announced the arrival of our rescue aircraft, another Black Hawk, this one configured for combat search and rescue operations. These birds carried additional armor, defensive weapons, and most importantly, the specialized personnel trained to extract soldiers from hostile environments. "Thunder Eagle 7, this is Dustoff 3-2, came the transmission from the rescue helicopter. "We have you in sight and are beginning our approach. Be prepared for immediate extraction." The rescue Black Hawk came in fast and low, using the terrain to mask its approach from any remaining enemy positions. The pilots were flying with the kind of aggressive precision that you only see from aviators who've done this type of mission dozens of times under combat conditions. But just as the rescue helicopter was beginning its final approach to our position, Ghost called out a warning that made my blood run cold. "RPG, RPG, enemy personnel with rocket-propelled grenade bearing 270 degrees. I could see him through my binoculars, an insurgent fighter positioned on a rocky outcropping about 300 meters away, shouldering an RPG-7 and taking aim at our rescue helicopter. If that rocket found its mark, we'd have 2 downed aircraft and twice as many people trapped on that mountain. There was no time for complex tactical decisions. Sometimes in combat, you have to rely on training, instinct, and the skills of the soldiers around you. "Viper!" I shouted. "Take that shot!" Lisa Johnson, our sniper from Montana, had already seen the threat and was adjusting her aim. The target was moving, partially concealed, and at a range that would challenge even the most experienced marksman. But Viper had trained for exactly this type of shot, and she'd never let us down before. The crack of her M24 sniper rifle echoed across the plateau, and through my binoculars I watched the enemy fighter with the RPG crumple and fall. The rocket-propelled grenade tumbled harmlessly down the mountainside, and our rescue helicopter continued its approach unharmed. "Target down," Viper reported with professional calm, as if she'd just completed a routine training exercise instead of saving the lives of everyone on that mountain. The rescue helicopter touched down on our plateau with the kind of precision that makes military aviation look easy, even though I knew the pilots were operating at the very limits of their aircraft's performance capabilities. The thin air at our altitude reduced engine power and rotor efficiency, making every aspect of the approach more challenging. "Load up! Load up!" called the crew chief of the rescue bird, and we began moving toward the aircraft in the order we'd rehearsed during our training. Doc Williams went first, carrying our medical supplies and prepared to provide emergency care for anyone who might have been injured during the extraction. Rodriguez was reluctant to leave his damaged Black Hawk behind, but I reminded him that helicopters could be replaced. Crew chiefs couldn't. He grabbed his essential tools and personal gear and joined the rest of us moving toward the rescue aircraft. As we loaded into the rescue helicopter, I took one last look at our defensive position. The rocky plateau was scarred with bullet impacts and blast craters from the mortar rounds. Our damaged Black Hawk sat silent and broken, a testament to the violence we'd endured over the past hour. But we were all alive, we were all accounted for, and we were going home. In my 25 years of military service, I'd learned that sometimes the most important victories are the ones where everyone comes home alive. The rescue helicopter lifted off with all of us aboard, and as we climbed away from that mountain plateau, I could see the Apache gunships continuing to patrol the area, ensuring that no enemy forces would be able to interfere with our extraction. Looking back at that operation now, I'm struck by how many things had to go exactly right for all of us to survive. The skill of our pilots during the emergency landing, the training and discipline of my team during the defensive action, the precision of the Apache gunships, and the courage of the rescue crew who flew into a hot landing zone to get us out. But most of all, I think about the bonds between soldiers that were forged and tested on that mountain. When everything went wrong, when we were surrounded and outnumbered, when death was falling from the sky in the form of mortar rounds and rocket-propelled grenades, not one member of my team even considered giving up or leaving anyone behind. I want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think happened next? How do you think this operation affected the rest of our deployment? Leave your thoughts below, because your engagement helps me know what stories you want to hear next. The flight back to base should have been a time to decompress, to let the adrenaline fade and start processing what we'd just been through. But in a combat zone, you never really relax until you're inside the wire. And even then, you're always listening for the sound of incoming rockets or mortars that could shatter the illusion of safety. As our rescue Black Hawk climbed away from that mountain plateau, I looked around at my team. These soldiers had just proven themselves under the most extreme conditions imaginable, and every one of them had performed with the kind of professionalism that makes me proud to have served in the United States Army. Doc Williams was checking everyone for injuries one more time, even though we'd already confirmed that nobody had been seriously hurt. That's just the kind of medic he was. Thorough, caring, and never satisfied until he was absolutely certain that everyone under his care was going to be okay. Bulldog was still monitoring our radio frequencies, maintaining communication with base and providing updates on our status. Even though we were safely aboard the rescue aircraft, his job wasn't finished until we were back on the ground at our forward operating base. Viper was quietly cleaning her rifle, a ritual that every sniper learns early in their career. That weapon had just saved all our lives with a single, perfectly placed shot, and she was treating it with the respect it deserved. The rest of my team was doing what soldiers do after combat, checking their equipment, conducting personal after-action reviews, and quietly processing the experiences they'd just lived through. Combat has a way of focusing your mind on what's truly important, and I could see each of them working through their own thoughts about the mission. Rodriguez, our crew chief, was staring out the window at the mountains below, probably thinking about the Black Hawk we'd left behind. In the aviation community, losing an aircraft is never easy, even when it's due to enemy action and everyone survives. That helicopter had been his responsibility, and I knew he was taking its loss personally. "Rodriguez," I called over the noise of the rotors, "you did everything right back there. That bird brought us down alive when it should have fallen apart in midair. You and Tank and Phoenix saved all our lives with that landing." He nodded, but I could tell he was still processing the loss. That's the thing about professional soldiers. They take responsibility for everything that happens on their watch, even when circumstances are completely beyond their control. The Apache gunships that had saved us were still patrolling the area around our crash site, and I could hear their pilots coordinating with base to ensure that enemy forces couldn't recover any useful intelligence or equipment from our damaged aircraft. Standard procedure called for destroying any sensitive equipment that couldn't be recovered, and I was confident that our maintenance teams would be back to retrieve anything salvageable once the area was secure. As we approached our forward operating base, I could see the controlled chaos that always accompanies a combat search and rescue operation. Medical personnel were standing by, intelligence officers were preparing to debrief us, and maintenance crews were already preparing to inspect our rescue aircraft for any damage it might have sustained during the mission. But the sight that meant the most to me was seeing Tank Thompson and Phoenix Martinez standing near the landing pad, both of them wearing flight suits and looking like they were ready to get right back in another aircraft. They'd been evaluated by medical personnel and cleared for duty, which meant their skills and courage had brought us down safely without serious injury to themselves. The rescue helicopter touched down with the gentle precision that marks truly professional aviators, and as the engines wound down, I prepared to lead my team through the debriefing process that would follow any significant combat action. "Listen up," I called to my soldiers as we prepared to disembark. "We've got debriefings to attend, reports to write, and lessons to capture from this operation. But before we get caught up in all that administrative work, I want you to know that every one of you performed magnificently out there. You proved that American soldiers don't break under pressure, and you reminded me why I'm proud to serve alongside warriors like you." The formal debriefing process took several hours and involved multiple intelligence and operations personnel who wanted to understand every aspect of our mission. We analyzed the enemy tactics, discussed our own procedures, and identified lessons learned that could help other units avoid similar situations. The intelligence picture that emerged was sobering. The enemy force that had ambushed us was larger, better equipped, and more professionally trained than we'd initially estimated. They'd been watching our operations for weeks, studying our patterns, and waiting for the right opportunity to strike. The attack on our aircraft had been planned and coordinated, not a random encounter, but what impressed the intelligence analysts was how effectively we'd responded to the ambush. Despite being outnumbered and caught in a prepared enemy position, we'd maintained discipline, executed proper defensive tactics, and held our ground until help arrived. The enemy had expected to overrun a small group of stranded Americans, but instead, they'd encountered professional soldiers who knew their business. Tank Thompson and Phoenix Martinez were already working with maintenance personnel to analyze what had happened to our aircraft and how to prevent similar incidents in the future. The RPG that hit our tail rotor had exploited a vulnerability in the Black Hawk's design, but there were modifications and tactical procedures that could reduce the risk of similar attacks succeeding. Rodriguez was deep in conversation with other crew chiefs, sharing technical details about how the aircraft had performed after taking damage. His insights would be valuable for training other air crews on emergency procedures and damage control techniques. Over the following days, as we processed the events of Operation Thunder Eagle, several things became clear. First, the enemy in Afghanistan was adaptive, intelligent, and willing to take significant risks to achieve their objectives. They were studying us as carefully as we were studying them, and they were learning from every engagement. Second, the training and preparation we'd received had proven its worth under the most extreme conditions. Every procedure we'd executed, every tactical decision we'd made, and every piece of equipment we'd used had been tested in the crucible of actual combat and had performed exactly as designed. Third, and most importantly, the bonds between soldiers that are forged in training and strengthened in combat are unbreakable. When everything went wrong on that mountain plateau, when we were surrounded and outnumbered, when death was literally falling from the sky, not one member of my team hesitated to do their job or considered abandoning their comrades. The weeks that followed Operation Thunder Eagle brought changes to our unit and our operations. We modified our flight routes to be less predictable, improved our intelligence gathering on enemy activities, and enhanced our coordination with Apache gunships and other supporting aircraft. But the most significant change was in the confidence and cohesion of my team. They'd been tested under fire and had proven themselves capable of handling anything the enemy could throw at them. They'd looked death in the face and had not blinked, and that kind of experience creates a bond that lasts long after the uniforms are hung up and the wars are over. Months later, when our deployment ended and we rotated back to the United States, I had the opportunity to reflect on what Operation Thunder Eagle had taught me about leadership, courage, and the incredible capabilities of American soldiers. Leadership in combat isn't about giving stirring speeches or making dramatic gestures. It's about making good decisions under pressure, trusting in the training and abilities of the people around you, and never giving up on the mission or the soldiers under your command. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's performing your duties effectively despite being afraid. Every soldier on that mountain was scared, myself included, but fear didn't prevent us from doing our jobs, and it didn't break the bonds of trust and mutual support that held us together. The capabilities of properly trained and equipped American soldiers are extraordinary. When you combine individual skills with effective teamwork, supported by the right equipment and tactics, there's no situation that can't be overcome through determination and professional competence. Today, many years after that operation, I still stay in touch with the soldiers who served with me on that mountain plateau. We've all moved on to different phases of our lives, some still serving, some retired, some pursuing civilian careers, but we're connected by shared experiences that few people can truly understand. Tank Thompson continued flying for several more years before retiring and becoming a civilian flight instructor. Phoenix Martinez eventually became a battalion commander and is now preparing for promotion to colonel. Rodriguez opened his own aircraft maintenance business and is training the next generation of aviation mechanics. Doc Williams completed medical school after leaving the Army and is now a trauma surgeon, using the skills he learned as a combat medic to save lives in civilian hospitals. Viper Johnson became a police sniper and later a federal law enforcement agent, continuing to serve and protect in a different uniform. Each of them carries the memory of that day when everything went wrong, but somehow turned out right, when training and courage and mutual trust overcame impossible odds and brought everyone home alive. Operation Thunder Eagle taught me that the most important victories aren't always the ones that make headlines or earn medals. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply ensuring that everyone on your team makes it home to their families, that the bonds of brotherhood forged in training remain unbroken under fire, and that the mission is accomplished despite overwhelming obstacles. If you're still with me at the end of this story, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story from my 25 years of military service. Leave a comment and tell me what you thought about Operation Thunder Eagle and what other stories you'd like to hear. And don't forget to check out all the products and gear I recommend. You'll find everything in the description or pinned in the first comment. The mountains of Afghanistan tested us that day, but they didn't break us. The enemy tried to defeat us, but they failed. And the bonds between soldiers that were forged in the crucible of combat have lasted long after the last shot was fired and the last helicopter lifted off. That's what real military service looks like, not the Hollywood version with dramatic music and impossible heroics, but the genuine article where ordinary people do extraordinary things because their training prepared them, their leaders trusted them, and their fellow soldiers depended on them. Operation Thunder Eagle was one mission among hundreds I participated in during my career, but it stands out because it demonstrated everything that's best about American soldiers: courage under fire, competence under pressure, and an absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. The Black Hawk that wouldn't fall became a symbol for all of us who served on that mountain. Like that aircraft, we took hits, we absorbed damage, and we kept functioning when everything seemed to be falling apart. We brought each other home because that's what soldiers do, and that's what America expects from the men and women who serve in uniform. Every day, in places around the world that most Americans will never see, soldiers are writing their own versions of Operation Thunder Eagle. They're facing impossible odds, making split-second decisions that determine life and death, and proving that freedom isn't free and that some things are worth fighting for. Their stories deserve to be told, their sacrifices deserve to be remembered, and their service deserves to be honored. That's why I share these experiences, not to glorify war, but to honor the warriors who answer the call when their country needs them. Thank you for listening to this story from my time in uniform. Thank you for supporting the channel and helping these military stories reach new audiences. And most of all, thank you for remembering that behind every uniform is a human being who chose to serve something larger than themselves. Until next time, this is Steve Harris, former Sergeant Major, United States Army, reminding you that freedom is protected by those willing to fight for it, and that the warrior spirit lives on in every generation of Americans who choose to serve.